All right, all right. Welcome to the Lineage Legacy Podcast. I'm happy to finally be able to record this first episode here. I have my cousin Rudy Aguilar, aka Rodolfo Aguilar. Um, Rudy, introduce yourself.
Hello. Can you guys hear me?
We can hear you very nice and clear.
Perfect. Yep. We're using legal names here.
But again, guys, this is going to be our first attempt to record a podcast, so bear with us. Um, and as you guys know, this podcast is going to be highlighting family histories and family legacies of all sorts of people from different walks of life. Right now, for my first guest, I'm happy to have my cousin. My cousin was actually very close to my grandfather before he passed away. One of the only grandkids, I would say, that had a close relationship, as he's one of the oldest out of the cousins. So he had some personal time with him as he was growing up and the last days of my grandfather. So he also got to know a little bit more information of great grandparents and great uncles and where we come from. So to give you guys a little bit of a backstory, our family is from Querétaro, Mexico. So that's central part of Mexico. Um, a brother sister state with Guanajuato and San Luis Potosí, if anyone is familiar with that, and not a lot of people are familiar with Querétaro, but it's a beautiful state. It's got desert, it's got mountains, and it's got like a rainforest to it. So, and it's a very beautiful city too. A lot of history. But our family comes from Querétaro, but that's not where they're initially from. As Rudy will kind of tell you guys a little later, our family comes from from different areas or kind of gypsies, maybe, who knows. But we were part of those families that were kind of going all over the place in Mexico looking for water as they were farmers. So I'm happy to bring him on, and I'll stop talking because this show is about the guest, and so he has a lot more information than I do. So he can start it off, Rudy. I'm not sure if you want to start off with the great grandparents. I think you have a little bit of a format of how you want to start, so I'll let you take this away.
Yeah. Perfect. No, yeah, if you don't mind. Yeah. So I did some digging. Of course, some of this is I did a long time ago. For a family tree project I did when I was in college. But as well, just recently, I spoke to some of my dad, some uncles. Yeah, and then touched up on that, where we came from and how I found those resources in case anyone wants to look for their family stuff, which is pretty cool, pretty gnarly. So yeah, great grandparents, actually great grandparents. We have Pedro Aguilar, and then we also have Maria Ventura Aguilar. Of course, they shared that name because they were married. How did I come across this information? Well, in the late 1800s, we have something called the Mormon movement in Mexico, and they did something pretty cool, which a lot of people are not familiar with, but we're familiar with here in the United States from living in the United States. The census. So the census essentially means they were researching who lives with who, with how many people are in the home, family members, sort of, all that fun stuff, and where. So the Mormon Church did the first census in Mexico, and they annotated all this stuff down. There are, first and last names, as well as signatures and ages of these individuals, and which is pretty gnarly, which is pretty cool when you think about it, perspective wise, because this has happened, over 100 plus years ago, and they were the ones documenting who was in Mexico, and around what time, roughly. So that's where I got these names from. Um, they are the parents to Salvador Aguilar, which is my paternal grandpa's dad, and then yeah, so that's kind of where we started from. But before we can even get to Querétaro, El Plátano to be exact, that's where the little town slash
Village.
village. Yeah, I don't even think we'd consider it a town at this
No,
point because
it's a village.
it's a village because
Still.
I think it's it's under 100 people, 120 people population wise, and I think at its prime, I don't even think it got past that. And perspective wise, everyone's moved away from there. It's mostly older family members who live there who've moved back home. Um, but yeah, so during this time, and I go back to this late 1800 stuff. Um, yeah, so from what my abuelo Genaro told us, we were wandering slash traveling with groups who were migrating from the northern part of Mexico. I know we're in San Diego, so we think of the north as here, California, but no, northern part of Mexico. So they were traveling from the north part of Mexico to the south, looking for sources of water and sources of fertile land. So they're traveling um, south, to more fertile land, nicer climate. Because of course, when we think of northern Mexico, there's Sonora, there's all the
Chihuahua.
desert, the Chihuahua, you know, not the most fertile of places. Of course, there are a lot of stuff that grows in those areas, but for what our family was doing at the time, we're farmers and stuff, so we were growing the tropical fruits. Yeah, they were traveling further south, and then as it, historically speaking, we weren't in the best of times. Late 19th century, late 1800s, we were in this economical, political situation. Um, if my history nerds will call it the Porfiriato. It wasn't doing all too hot. This economical disparity was happening, so a lot of families were doing the same thing that we were doing, and we ended up in this little town where they found natural sources of water. So from what I was able to gather from my grandpa and from a few other relatives who I'll mention, it we were looking for water, traveling down these dry river beds, and we come from the north into the south, and we end up finding actual you know natural springs, and that's kind of what El Plátano is known for. There's a lot of they call them, some people call them as pozos, some you know not know them as donde nace el agua, stuff like that. So yeah, there was a lot of that happening. So natural spring water coming up from underneath the ground, and it's actually very healthy, drinkable water. It's some we talk about there's actual riverbeds, but some of this river isn't drinkable. Um, but when they found this natural spring water, that's kind of where they ended up because of that. And this is in the late 1800s, coming into the 1900s, and that's kind of how we establish our family history. So unfortunately, that's as far as I could go back with the help of the census, but as well from the information I was able to gather with my grandpa. Yeah, and then so we have Pedro, and then Maria Ventura, and then they give birth to a few children, and it's a huge toss up on who was actually in the family because the census wasn't really good at gathering who was who, language barrier and all. Um, but they would just put down names. Let's say, and we talked about this briefly last time with Francisco. It's let's say I was over at Francisco's house, and the Mormon church came over and they said, "Hey, what's your name? Do you live here?" And they'd say something along the lines of, "Oh, I'm visiting." Okay. Well, hey, we're doing a census. You want to put your name down? And they would actually add you to that list of that you were family members. So in that census, when I looked up our great great grandparents, it came up with a few names of individuals who I'd never heard of before. And funny enough, they're like, "Oh no, no, those are not their children, but their relatives, their family. They must have been over on that day when the Mormon Church came over." And we have names like um, Palemon Aguilar, and then we have my great grandpa, who's funny enough was home that day, so we have him in there. We have his name. So I was like, "Oh, okay, cool." So unfortunately, we don't have like a physical. Oh, he was born on this date, but you know, gathering the information given to us, I was like, okay, so he was alive in the very early 1900s. So we're like, okay, cool. So we can establish that. Um, so Salvador. Aguilar, which is my grandpa's dad, he marries a Paula. You know, yeah. So we have her name, so it's Paula Velasquez Maqueda, and then he marries. They marry together. They start a small little family, and I say this with all the sarcasm in the world, small, because there's like 11 of them, 11 uncles. Um, yeah, so it's like
Small back in the day.
small back in the
Yeah.
day. You literally wanted
You
to.
had 11, 10, you were small, and people were having,
Yeah,
16.
yeah, definitely. Because it took a village, but you also wanted a village because you needed the farmhand, you needed the workers, you needed someone to take care of the cattle and stuff like
Yeah.
that. So, um, yeah. So there's 11 of them, I believe, actually.
And question
Question.
was Paula and Salvador Aguilar, were they born in El Plátano?
Yeah.
Or were they brought as kids from northern part of Mexico while they were
No,
migrating?
no. So, we call her Ama Paula or Ama
Yeah.
Paula. So she's originally from there. Well, I don't have any background information on her because there's a little bit of hearsay on where she was really from, but she actually was originally from there. That's as far as we go.
Hmm.
But his family, regards to her background, we really don't know. Other than her mom, um, a bit of skepticism on the dad's side. We don't know where the dad came from or if he was originally from there. There's a lot of misinformation on that side. But yeah, our abuelito Salva, he was from there because he was born there. Um, so they're first generation. So it's funny how when I wrote down in my notes too, I was like first generation Queretanos or first generation El Plátano.
Plataneños.
Plataneños, or what are we gonna call them? Yeah. So yeah, I was like, okay, cool. This is fun. Um, but yeah, no, they're first generation, which makes us like fourth generation, which is not too bad when we're trying to establish this whole historical context of where we come from. But yeah, we're like fourth generation farmers if we really think about it, or fifth generation farmers if we really want to go back, you know. But it's pretty amazing how um, we ended up there. The whole traveling, I think that was kind of cool. And I was like, oh, that sounds like fun. And we ended up finding this beautiful little oasis. And I mean that by all means. Um, Maybe Francisco can show you guys some video if we end up doing video for this of the river and stuff. I
It's
have some
beautiful.
footage. Yeah, it sounds amazing. And then when you go to sleep at night, you hear the river just flowing. So it's a whole it's so surreal when you're there at night and you're experiencing
It's a little jungle. Think of a little jungle
it,
within the desert,
li-
within the desert valley.
Desert Valley. Yeah, because the closest town is probably like an hour away, 45 minutes now because it's a little paved now. But yeah, it's not. We're out in the middle of nowhere, to be honest. We're in the Sierra Madre, and we're at the bottom of that. If you think of the closest city, some people might know this. It's El Pinal de Moles, and they're at the top. So they're at something like 8,000, 8,500 feet of elevation. Um, it gets cold there,
Hmm.
and yeah, we're in this valley. It gets really hot in El Plátano. The next closest location to us, or closest little town, which actually would probably be considered a town, would be La Misión de Bucareli, which coincides with a few other things with the Catholic Church and their expansion into Mexico, into Querétaro, and yeah, so that's kind of where we're at, you know, um, geographically speaking. And no, we'll dive into um, our abuelo Genaro. So that's kind of what we're here for. What we're all excited to talk about because he
Yeah.
was an amazing person. He had a lot to do with who we are, how we portray ourselves, and how we're so proud of being from this little town that he made his own, and how we can still go back to his little hometown and feel just at home.
And how the name still lives on.
Yeah, definitely. And this is the reason why we're here doing this to share with you guys a little bit about his story and how he came to be and how we got here. Um, but yeah, so our abuelo Genaro, he is the oldest of quite a bit of children. Um, yeah, he grew up in this little town, pretty poor. It's they lived in this little shack with him and his other siblings and one of our uncles, our tío Alfredo, because we have two of them. So we have our tío Alfredo el menor, which is actually one of my abuelo Genaro's children, and then we have his brother, which we call el tío Alfredo el grande,
Yeah.
or el mayor.
Which you can consider, I guess, in a great uncle.
Yeah, our great uncle.
Our great uncle, yeah.
Yeah, so
and other one's our uncle.
Yeah, he's done some interviews and stuff where they've showed, and we've got pictures and stuff where they show the little house where it's not little. I'll tell you that it's just like a giant shack, by all means. With the kitchen, it had some bedding, which was usually called metates. Just rolled up little blanket style, and you slept on the floor. Yeah, I've experienced this. It's not very comfortable.
No.
But this is how they lived, and they made do with what they had. So in that area in El Plátano, so you're wondering, like, there's not a whole lot to do in this little town. There's not a whole lot of people living there. Why are they still living there? Well, one, it has really fertile land, free water. The water hasn't dried up in 140 years, and it still hasn't. I don't think it will. I'm no scientist. Don't quote me. But yeah, there's tons of water. I mean,
it's rich in natural resources and
rich in natural resources. Yeah. And at the time, there were mining. So this is a mining town. So that's another thing. There is up and down the Sierra Madre. They've been mining this for a very, very long time. So my abuelo Jenaro used to go help mine, and
sorry to cut you off, but I want to backtrack to my abuelito Jenaro, my grandpa. He's one of how many kids from my great grandma and great grandpa from Salvador and Paola Aguilar? He's one of 6.
I don't know actually. Because I was trying to count down the numbers because there's a few of them.
We have
we can name them off. We can just start with that. All right, so
Albina.
So we start off with our grandpa because he's oldest. So it's Abuelito Genaro, and then we have our tia Albina, and then we have our
tia Rosa.
Tia Rosa,
right?
The one that passed, right?
No, the one that lives here.
Reina,
sorry.
Okay. And then we have...
My bad.
Our tío Roberto.
He passed.
He's passed. And then...
Abuelito Alfredo.
Abuelo Alfredo. And then we have one of his other brothers who passed.
Was it... He lived here, and his kids still live here. He passed like 2000 and I want to say like 6 or something, right?
Yeah.
I'm so sorry, I can't remember your name. He used to live with us back in the day when we were young.
Yeah, him and my grandpa used to hang out, and I vaguely remember going on trips to El Plátano from Querétaro.
Aureliano?
That's one of them.
Yeah.
And then there's another one.
Oh.
So we're at
7.
And then there's one that passed.
Right.
I think she was like one of the older ones too, from what I remember. From what Grandpa told me. She had a tragic passing when she was like 26 years old. She didn't get to live very long. I think she still has one daughter that's still around, from what I remember. So one of our aunts is still around. I think there's 8. There might be more. I know there was more. I just can't think.
So our grandfather was one of 8 or 9, maybe.
Yeah. So it's quite a bit.
Yeah, it's quite a bit.
It's quite a bit.
So he had. You were going to how many kids he had?
Yeah. So we're going to how many kids he had.
My abuelito Alfredo. Oh, sorry, abuelito Jenaro.
Abuelito Genaro.
Yes.
Is it 11 of us, right?
It's 11. Plus one that had passed away that we heard passed away very, very young.
Yep.
As a baby.
Yep. So yeah.
That would have been 12.
No, it's 11. I counted her. Yeah. She passed. And she passed. Okay, so this is how remote this whole area is that she passed from what we believe, what my grandpa believes and my grandma believes is to be a cold. She
Oh,
got a
what?
fever, a cold.
Oh, cold.
Yeah, so she got a fever, overnight. Simple as that, and
Yeah.
that was it.
And yeah, there was no resources back in the day, and this must have been in 19 who knows 1930s, 1940s.
Yeah, so something like in the 1950s maybe,
Yeah.
because her grandpa was born in the late 30s.
Okay. Yes, that makes sense.
Yeah, 1930s, and yeah, he didn't have a
And
whole,
even up until about 10 years ago, there was no paved roads or
yeah,
really like you mentioned earlier, the closest town or town that you can
town,
consider
yeah, town
is 45 minutes to an hour away
in a car.
in a car with a little bit of a paved road access to the
Yeah,
town. But back then, I remember when we first started going to Mexico, there was no paved road. It was all super rocky. It was about an hour to an hour and 20 minutes in
yeah,
car,
yeah. You're
and
going 5 miles an hour the whole way, and
right,
you're sitting there. If you ate, man, God,
yeah,
man, let's hope you ate something healthy, because yeah, you're not. Yeah, it's super. When it rains, it's super dangerous. People
yeah,
flip over, people die all the
yeah,
time, and that's when they kind of started like, oh hey, we should probably drive. We should probably make a road down
right.
this dangerous path. Just
So it makes
imagine.
sense that back then she passed away unfortunately from cold, where there was no resources that they could get
Yeah,
help for her quick enough.
quick enough. Yeah,
Yeah.
then that's the other situation. Is quick enough. Yeah, because before then there wasn't really a road you could go down into it. You'd have to walk up, hike up, and if we can add some photos down the road, but it's these. We talk about the closest town being 8,500 feet in elevation. You you're at the bottom of this valley. You have to hike up, and
Hmm.
it's 2-3 hours. I know. Did you do the hike?
I've never done the
You
hike.
know the
No.
hike. Someone else, I think a lot of our cousins have done the hike, and it's even if you come down it, I think it's like an hour and a half,
Yeah.
hour 45 if you're walking pretty fast,
Yeah.
and it's not a nice hike.
Right.
It's not pretty. So yeah, they'd have to go to this town to get their resources. Of course, if they didn't have anything, let's say they're building something. Of course, you either have to make it yourself or find someone that can make this for you, or find whatever kind of steel or concrete you need. So yeah, you'd have to travel to this little town. But the only other resource that they had there was that there was this mine. When he was growing up, my Rodolfo, so he'd worked there. He didn't have a whole lot of schooling, very very elementary, and as far as how far he went up, he didn't really even talk about how much actual education he had. Um, but he did learn how to count. He did learn how to read. He did learn how to do some math. He did learn how to write as well. So this is this little 9-year old, growing up, working in a mine, you know, uh, they're digging out whatever they were digging out. I think it was mercury at the time. And yeah, so he's working the furnace, and he's not really working it per se, but he's still there physically. And the reason why he got a job is because he knew how to do math,
And you had to count.
and he learned how to count, and he had to count up how much the stuff weighed at the end of the day. But at the same time, you have to hang out by the furnace and count, how many buckets or how many whatever they were filling up. And at the end of the day, he'd add it up and be like, okay, and that's how people would get paid.
Hmm.
And little by little, he started making this, this little bit of money for himself and his family, because their family was poor, super super poor, and they're super humble about it too, which is awesome. But when you think about it, yeah, the resources the amount of things they were able to accumulate was because they were just always in that mindset of, hey, let's work, and let's farm, and let's do what we can. And at the same time, they had cattle, they had, they were growing their own fruit, their own fruit, their own veggies and stuff like that. So not only was he doing that, he was helping out my grandpa, our great grandpa, work and all that not so fun stuff. So he didn't really have that whole childhood
Experience.
experience that he wanted to. But at the end of the day, I don't think that really stopped him from becoming who he really wanted to be, which is someone who wanted to learn um, many, many things. And we'll go down that. But yeah, that's kind of where he started off his journey. And then funny enough, his parents' house is right above the school. So every day, my grandpa would go to work. He'd walk by the school, and he'd walk by at the end of the day. And funny enough, he starts getting older. Starts growing up a little bit, and he meets this young young lady who we know as grandma now. Is so we are Abuelita Trinidad or
Mm-hmm.
Trini, and she's going to school. So she's going to school. She's older. He's older. She's still going to school. So two different perspectives of life. Two different walks of life, literally, socioeconomically speaking. He has to work every day for a living. She goes to school, and she's doing the back and forth and to school from her house. And I've asked my grandparents, hey, how'd you guys meet? And my grandma would always like sit there and be like, oh, we just met one day. And then my grandpa's like, oh, like just tell him the story. And my grandma finally, after a few years of convincing, because I'd go to Mexico all the time, so I'd be like, hey, abuelita, like, how'd you guys meet? He's like, oh, well, I go to school and I'd see this muchacho, this güerito, tall güerito. She's short.
Yeah. And our grandpa was quite light skinned actually.
Yeah, he's
Yeah.
actually really light skinned. It's just funny. He's like, so we call him güerito. He's like,
Yeah.
yeah, this muchacho blanco aquí caminando sin camisa todo el tiempo. And I'm like, oh, dang. All right, cool. All right, grandpa. And they'd cross paths because, you know, he'd have to walk down past the school to get to his mom's house, to his house. So coincidentally, they ended up meeting, whatever. And yeah, and it's funny enough because he always talks about how she showed up to his house. He's like, oh, I never had to steal her. So I don't know what that is, like the whole Mexican tradition of stealing your woman or whatever. He's like, I didn't have to steal her. She just showed up when they were her things. And she said, I'm moving in. And he said, all right, cool, move in. And she tells a different story, but him in his eyes, he's like, no, I never asked her to move in. She just showed up when they were her things. So our grandpa was a whole different lifestyle. It's just I love him for what he did and what he does, what he did. And yeah, so that's how kind of they met. They just by
Cross paths.
literally cross paths
Right.
for I don't know how many years until one day.
One was going to work, the other one was going to school.
Yeah. And it's funny because she's like, yeah, I see him walk down, no shirt. I'm like, oh, damn, grandpa, no shirt, right by the school, huh? He's like, sometimes I just started getting hot right before I got home. I was like, hey, power to you. No, they probably already liked each other or something. They probably already talked and or they knew each other because they're very similar in age, very similar in age. I think they're like a year or two apart.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah. So that's how they met. And then they ended up starting a family.
Do you know pretty young at what age they started a family?
How
How old were they when they?
I think she was around 18 years old because there is a huge age difference.
Mm-hmm.
There's an age difference, yeah. So yeah. But before we can get there, our grandpa, before they started their family, he would work in different areas of Mexico. So he ended up working for someone that had big properties and stuff, and he still was doing the whole agricultural farm thing, the whole farmer thing, because that's kind of our background, our whole agricultural aspect. And he was going to different parts of Mexico, um, and trying to make some living for himself and trying to better himself in that aspect. And yeah, so he would go he would mention something about Matamoros in Mexico, and then he'd go to different places, and he'd go there for 6 months and come back. Go there for a few months and then come back. So he got to travel a lot within
Mexico.
When he was a lot younger too. So then at that point, I remember he was telling me that he was he was in that late teens, early 20s and whatnot. So his grandpa, his dad, our great grandpa, Abuelito Salva, he was in the Bracero program, which is the Bracero program. Just to give you guys a little context, um, it was a program where you could get a visa and work in the United States if you were from Mexico. So they were, the whole cheap labor thing situation, and you'd go work for 6 months and then you'd come back. But the whole point of this is they would give you a portion of your money up front, and the rest they'd send to Mexico. You know that there's a whole situation with that down the road. And so he was able doing that. He was doing that back and forth. And so my grandpa was like, "Hey, I want to go do that. Can I go do that?" And you know, he found his own way to make it to
The program.
to the program. And then if we have any um, historical people here, we can, the Bracero program wasn't all that it was hyped up to be. For you to get to the United States, you have to go through these immigration physicals. You stand in these lines, and then you form up from the state that you were from. If you were from a state that, for example, one of these bigger states, let's say, um, like Mexico,
Hmm.
the main capital. So you're from, like, let's say one of the bigger states. Those would fill up a lot faster. So you'd go stand in these little other states. Oh, just say you're from this other state, and you'd hop in the line, and you'd be like, okay, cool, perfect, boom, and then you'd get through. But of course, there was that stigma at the time that we were dirty, they were filthy, we were unvaccinated or whatever. We were just we would get pretty much hosed down with insecticide and stuff, and it check them for, like, they check their gums, check for diseases. They'd get all naked, they'd hose them down. Yeah, my grandpa said he went through that a few times, and he said it was freaking terrible. He's
Yeah.
like, yeah,
It's not like a prison,
yeah.
like a prison introduction
Oh no,
or
you look at these
like a
photos and you're just
labor
like wondering, like,
camp.
what concentration camp they're in.
Right.
They're just like at the border getting inspected, by the officers and stuff. You're like, all right, cool, whatever. Yeah, it looks terrible. He told me about that. He's like, you stand out there for 4 6 hours, and you hoping your line, you get to the front of the line and they haven't met the quota. And he's like, but if you haven't, you just hop in another line, and just be like, all right, I
Yeah.
guess we're standing on this line now. Hoping that they haven't met their quota for, like, some of the smaller states.
Hmm.
And luckily enough, our state is so small that he just hop in that line, and just people would be like, well, what state are you from? Oh, I'm from Querétaro. Oh, okay, yeah. Is it small? Yeah, yeah. All right. And people would hop in his line and
Hmm.
be like, all right, cool, we're getting through. And that's how he got into the Bracero program. And eventually coming back and forth, and then starting his family, and knowing the house that that we visit, that Francisco and I visit, um, throughout time, and that's how he got that. But he he traveled, in the United States quite a bit because of the Bracero program, and then he mentions one story. Francisco's gonna laugh about this, but he always says, it's Michigan story, and and don't quote me on how he says it or whatnot, because it's
You're paraphrasing it.
I'm paraphrasing it. All right, don't come for me. My cousins are gonna come for me because I'm not gonna say it right. Um, yeah. So he talks about he's in Michigan picking cotton, and they're on his bus, and he's like, we were almost in Michigan, because he called it Michigan, and he's like, almost in Michigan. He's like, había una neblina, estaba muy feo, íbamos en una carretera y no se miraba nada, y de repente caímos nos estancamos, no sé dónde caímos, era en un lago. He's like, era Lake Michigan. And he talks about that.
Oh shit.
And he's just like, yeah, it was Lake Michigan. And he's like, talks about how big it is, talks about the ocean. He's like, yeah, it's like a big ocean in the middle of nowhere. And I go, oh, cool. I'm like, what are you doing up there? Like, what's the whole deal with up there? He's like, we're picking cotton. And I was like, oh, you pick cotton? He was like, yeah, I pick cotton. I was like, wow, how is that? He goes, that's terrible. It's cold up there. It's snow, and
Hmm.
and you live in this giant encampment. It's not just you. It's not. And when we think about the whole Bracero program, this is in the 50s. There's a lot of racial disparity. You know, and Michigan, you're still picking cotton. So I'm like, okay, so if there were, who was picking cotton? So I asked him, I'm like, hey, so who's like picking cotton? He's like, anyone who was in the Bracero program, or anyone who could come. And he's like, and we worked with a lot of morenitos,
Hmm.
and with a lot of the African American community. So I was like, oh wow. He's like, yeah. So we lived in this giant camp. So whoever couldn't find housing had to live in this giant camp. And literally, you just live out in the field, and then you wake up in the morning and you go pick cotton. And so I'm like, oh cool. Like, how much were you getting paid? respective wise, I'm like, I don't know, we're getting paid like 2 cents, 3 cents a day or something. I'm like, oh, gee,
Yeah,
that's
balling.
that's money, right? And he's all like, yeah, I think so. I don't know. I didn't, coming
Back
from,
then, you wouldn't really question anything. Really,
yeah,
you had the opportunity to come to a different country with better opportunities. You really wouldn't
and
question how much you're getting paid. I think.
but he did know it was a lot more than he was getting paid in Mexico.
Right.
So,
I mean, or else you wouldn't take or else you wouldn't take it up.
yeah. So, and then you're talking about Querétaro, right? You're talking central Mexico. He goes up through Texas, okay, or he's going up to through the border, and then if you look at Michigan in the map, so I was looking at it earlier today, and I'm like, dude, Michigan's at the very tip
Mm-hmm.
of at the very top of the United States,
Right next to Canada.
right next to Canada, and you got surrounded by the lakes, the Great Lakes, and I'm sitting there, I'm like, dude, that bus ride must have sucked. Like, I'm sure
Yeah.
you're not getting something fancy,
No, you're not getting ventilation. You're not getting AC. You're not getting heater if you're going through the cold.
You're getting a school bus with some boards and possibly stopping for water and
Mm-hmm.
a restroom break every 6 hours. God knows how long that took. 'Cause
Mm-hmm.
Texas is huge, first of all, and you're going all through that, and then you go to Lake Michigan, you up, and so they're pretty, wherever they're at, and so this is him in his early stage of his life, and he's just like there, like, all right, we're picking cotton, and then they got to the point where he wanted to make some extra money, and yeah, so people would write to each other, of course. People would write mail to each other, and then someone found out that he knew how to read and write. So then he goes, yeah. So there were a lot of people from southern Mexico, right? And then they would get mail or get letters from their loved ones, from their siblings and stuff, other significant others, and that would happen, right? And he would be like, "Oh, okay, cool," and then, but they didn't know how to read, so he's like, "Oh, let me read it to you." So he would read it to them for like a cent,
Mm.
and then he's all like,
Way
"But
to
if you want me
hustle.
to write back,
Another set.
that's another cent."
No way.
And then so he just started doing that, and he's like, because I didn't want to get up and pick cotton anymore. That is not easy,
Mm-mm.
and he was telling me like all these techniques on how to pick cotton, and then you got the spiders, you got cotton spiders in there, and it's cold, and you got to pick it with your fingertips, and if your fingertips freeze, you can't pick it right. And I was like, oh wow, it all goes into that. He's like, and if he gets wet, that sucks, it's hot, it's cold, and it's not pretty. And I was like, okay, cool. So what else did you do? He's like, oh, so someone got me someone has some clippers. There was a barber there. And I go, oh, cool. So someone taught you how to barber. He's like, yeah, yeah, yeah. So it's, I got some clippers, and he with his hands, we're having this conversation. He's showing me the hand clippers, and I was like, oh wow, the hand clippers. Of course, there wasn't electric clippers back then. Maybe there was. Who knows? But he's hand clipping, and he's like, I started doing haircuts, doing 2 cent, 2 cent, 3 cent haircuts, and I'm like, oh wow. He's like, yeah, yeah, yeah. I started barbering.
Started hustling.
So when I went back, I had some money, and I'm like, oh really? He's like, yeah, I had some money, so I started building my house. Spent all my life savings making that house, and I still went into debt, still couldn't build it. And I was like, oh wow, that sounds like modern times right now. So he built himself a little casita, which we all know now. It's a lot bigger now,
Yeah,
but
it's one of the biggest houses actually in the village.
yeah, in the little area, and we're talking big. Okay, so this is the 3 bedroom with the cocina and an outhouse, um, and that was that's enormous for these sides for these folks, and
Mm-hmm.
but also his family's growing, so they have their first couple children, so we have our tia Sara and our tio Lorenzo or tio Lencho, and the family starts growing from there. So he's like, hey, you know what? I'm back in debt. I borrowed some money. I need to go back. Boom. Fast forward. He's in the ambassador program, and once again he becomes a super bracero. So now super bracero is able to stay a little bit longer and able to come back a lot quicker.
Mm-hmm.
So he's doing that. He's working in back in Michigan, and this is like in the 60s and stuff, and whatnot. So there's a lot of like this social tension that's going on around those times and whatnot. He's getting paid a little bit more. He's making a little bit more money. But then something crazy happens when he's in Michigan. MLK um, passes, so he's there during all that fun stuff that happened and whatnot. And he talked about it too. When I asked him about it, I go, "Hey, what?" He's like, "Oh, a Morenito passed in that time when I was there."
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, "Oh, who is he talking about?" Like I don't know who he's talking about. I'm like, "Oh, maybe like one of his friends or something." He goes, "Oh, he was famous though. He was famous." And I was like, "Oh, okay, like dang." So I started like investigating, and then I was just like, "Who?" And I asked him one time, and I asked him just out of the blue. I was like, "Who was it, or what did he do?" He's like, "Oh, he would protest with people and stuff, and a lot of people spoke about him."
Mm-hmm.
And
And
I
I'm
was,
sure it got around to the Mexican
yeah,
communities too.
because one, because they were picking cotton with them, and
Mm-hmm.
then so with the African American community. So I was like, okay. So I was like, okay, cool. And I kind of started piecing it together, and I was like, oh, I'm like, oh, and I was like, oh, well, there was a few people who were doing this stuff at the
Yeah.
time, so I was like, oh, I didn't think it was gonna be. And when he talked about it afterwards, I was like, oh, I was like, does the name Martin Luther like ring a bell to you? Do you know who that is? And I showed him a picture. He's like, no, I don't know who that is, but yeah, I'm like, oh, he would protest in for black rights and stuff like that. He's like, oh, okay. Yeah, I don't know, but it was a sad day when he passed. He's like all the Morenitos left, and like they all, that day that he passed and whatnot, like everyone kind of went back home, and it was a strange time. And I was like, oh man. He's like, yeah, and it was just really different after that for us. Um, it changed some things for us and whatnot, and he really really talked about that, but yeah, he was still going back and forth Mexico, and trying to do better. And then we fast forward quite a bit. The family starts growing. There's my tio Salva in there. We have um, some of the older children are born in there. One of his oldest, I'm not sure where the one our aunt that passed away, where she was born exactly, but
One of
uh,
the first ones, right?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
she's one of the first ones. So I think it's either in between one of them. I think it was between my tia Sara, my tio Lencho,
Mm-hmm.
or my tio Salva. And yeah, so then we have a few more. We have uh, my tia Emma.
Mm-hmm.
She's in there. She's in that mix. And then
Are you going in order?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Sounds like it. You have Sara,
Yep. My tia Lencho,
Lencho,
and then my tio Salva,
Salvador.
and then we have my tia Emma.
Mm-hmm.
I think my dad's
I
next
think your
after that.
dad.
Yeah, my dad Rodolfo. He's next. And then we have I think it's your dad, right?
Gotta be. I
Yeah,
think
my
so.
tio Jenaro.
Right after your dad.
And then we have, I'm not sure who's next. If it's my tío Mero? No, no, no. My tía Beatriz.
Where's my tío Beto landing?
I think he's in between.
I think he's older than my dad, no?
No, he's younger.
Oh, he's younger.
I think he's younger. Because then we have my tío Beto, my tío Mero, and then it's my tío Quique and my tío Alfredo, the youngest. So yeah, that family, and at that point, by the time my tío Quique, my tío Beto, they've they've migrated into the actual city, into actual Querétaro.
Mm-hmm.
So by that time, but yet they were all born in El Plátano. They were all born there, but they've moved. I think it was between my tío Quique and my tío Alfredo, and they moved to Querétaro. And I remember my grandma telling us a story about one of our uncles. I think it was my tío Alfredo or my tío Quique, that he was upset when they moved to the city because they didn't like the city,
Mm-hmm.
and now we have that house. Yeah, my grandpa has that house in Querétaro, and they moved to the house, and he was like, "Yo quiero mi rancho." He's like, "Yo quiero vivir en mi rancho. I don't like this.
Mm-hmm.
There's too many people
Yeah,
here."
it's you're moving a
Yeah,
country
a
boy
country
or
boy with a
into
population of 100,
into a
150
city. Yeah.
to a city, a giant city, for to what they're used to.
Mm-hmm.
It'd be the equivalent of like moving from like the boonies to like San Diego or something,
Right.
downtown San Diego, and you're just like, no, why is there traffic? Why is
Right.
there cars here? Yeah, yeah. So that happened. But during this time, my grandpa is working throughout the United States. He stopped working in Michigan. He started working in Texas at some point, and then he ends up in Salinas. You know, at some point in his later stages. Um, Fast forward, he's had his kids. He's in Salinas. He's working up and down uh, Northern California, Southern California, and then we come full circle in the later stages of his life, which is like in his 50s, which is he ends up coming to Escondido, San Diego area, and he's had a family, he's known people here, and he started working at this giant grove in Zapascal Valley. So then we come to us, and how our parents got here. So he's working his giant avocado grove, still doing the whole agricultural, doing the whole farmer thing because he's really good at it.
And that's his last stop, right? Really, in the United States.
That is his last
working
stop, and
Yeah.
he was here for a long time. And it's from the late 80s, late 80s.
Like the early 2000s.
Early 2000s, yeah. 'Cause that's when he
Early.
retired. Early 2000s, yeah. That's
Yeah.
when he retired. And yeah, so my dad, Rodolfo, and then my tío Jenaro, so Francisco's dad,
Mm-hmm.
my tío Salva, my tío Lorenzo, they ended up coming to the United States around that time. And around that time, they were just the border. They talk about crossing the border and whatnot, and they talk about, all that stuff. Meanwhile, my abuelita Trini is still back in Mexico, raising all these children
By herself.
by herself, pretty much, with the help of my tia Sara, my tia Emma, my tia Beatriz.
Yeah.
The kids are being kids, and our uncles, all the male uncles, of course. They're like, well, I want to go hang out with my dad.
Mm-hmm.
They're
I want to
like,
go make money.
I want to go make money. But at the same time, they haven't really lived with their dad. Because my grandpa would come and go.
Yeah, he would travel
He was
a lot.
still doing this whole 6-month thing. I'll come back. I'm here for 2 months or do 3 months. Fix something, do something at the house, or buy property. Because my grandpa was always in that mindset of you have to have something.
Yeah.
Something to give your children. And he, and we talk about that a little bit. And he's doing that, but he every single time he's going back. Coincidentally, like there's, my grandma gets pregnant, of course. Like she's having kids. And yeah, that's happening. So, my tia Sara she just recently came actually for the first time,
Mhm.
which is pretty amazing.
About a month ago.
About a month ago, she was here. Yeah, and so, but my tío Lorenzo is one of the oldest. My tío Salva, and then my dad, and then Francisco's dad ended up coming to the United States, and they end up working with him, and they start this whole, making their life with our grandpa and getting to know him a little bit more personally. Of course, my grandpa would go back to Mexico sometimes for a few months, and he'd work, but at the same time, the work that they were doing there wasn't really economically what is it, helping them out. It was just more for them to stay stable and kind of survive. They weren't really making money. So our parents also didn't get to go to school as much. They have this elementary upbringing, same thing, that our grandpa went through. Unfortunately, they had to experience that, and they would have to help and work, and then same thing. So my grandpa would, whenever he'd go back, he'd still end up working at that mine every once in a while. So that mine was operating for a long time until they finally shut it down. It flooded. That's the only reason why they shut it down, is because it flooded and they couldn't properly mine out of it anymore. But my dad and then your dad, they would have to go and give him his lunch, and they were working some crazy hours. So they'd have to go drop off the food, which was like an hour and a half away. They drop off walking, so you'd have to walk it, and then come back, get ready for school, and then walk that hour and a half, 2 hour, hike, if you want to call it that, to the town where they go to school, and then come back, and then work, because then you got to take care of the crops, you got to take care of the cattle and stuff, you got to take care of whatever they had, and then do it all over again every day. So I'm sure that got annoying for them, and they're just like, you know what, I'm gonna go have the easy life, quote unquote easy. Yeah, and they're like, let's go work. Let's go work the fields.
Yeah.
You're
like, go to the other side.
Let's go al otro lado. Let's go to the other side. Let's go hang out with our dad.
Yeah.
When he leaves, we'll just leave with him. And they did that for a long, long time. They were going back and forth, and they talk about the border and stuff, and they talk about how easy it was to cross back then, and how you literally just walk across, and it was I was like, wow, that's crazy. And I've seen pictures now where I'm like, the border was literally just like
Yeah, it
fence
was open.
posts and barbed wire,
Right.
and barbed wire is like 4 feet tall, and that was the San Isidro border.
Mm-hmm.
A fence that ran like a mile down, and you just walk around the fence, and then you're on the other side, and then you're just like, cool, we're here, we
Yeah,
made
it
it.
wasn't a big wall. It wasn't.
No,
Yeah.
it wasn't what it is now. Come pick me up.
Right.
Call up your sibling. Hey, I'm here. Can you come pick me up?
Yeah.
So, yeah, so our parents did that, and they ended up working with our grandpa at this giant, giant, giant avocado grove, and we're talking like 1,000, 2,000 acre avocado grove. So that's how big we're talking. So there was a lot of people who lived there, and our grandpa, being our grandpa, he had this like big property as well. But behind the little place that he stayed at, he had this like little garden area which he liked to take care of. Coincidentally, he had a plátano, a banana tree.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it ever gave bananas, to be honest. Now that I'm thinking about it, I don't think I ever saw it.
In Sample Spot, he had this.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
yeah. He just had like 2 or 3 of them. You just see them. They're tall. Well, I was little. I was like 4 or 5 years old, so I could see them. I don't know how big they actually were, but I remember seeing them. I'm like, oh wow, these are giant. And I asked him one time, I'm like, oh, what are these? He's like, oh, these are banana trees. And I'm like, oh, cool. You being a 4 or 5 year old, they're like, oh yeah, what's a banana? They're learning about life. But he had like this keen eye for growing, for planting, and taking care of stuff. So he was really, really good at this, and it was crazy.
He had a green thumb.
Yeah, he had this. He found his niche, and he found it, and he ran with it. Because he's been doing this all his life, and boom, he found it, and he ran with it. And yeah, I remember him taking care of roses, and just different kinds of trees and different kinds of plants and stuff. So yeah, so whenever I think of him, I'm like, oh, plants. That's what I think about all the time. So yeah, our parents used to work there with him, and then for whatever experience it was, it must have been good or bad. But they got to hang out with their dad, and that's how I think about it now. Now that I'm older, I'm like, oh wow, they probably just wanted to get to know their dad, and whatnot. So I think that was beautiful. But at the same time, like, I have a story from my dad. My dad, one time, he's like, I got upset at your grandpa. I'm like, what did he do? He's like, he yelled at me for some shit. And I was like, oh, well, damn.
Well, what'd you do?
Hey, that sounds familiar. I'm like, what'd you do? He's like, I don't know. I did something wrong. And he's just like,
going off on him.
Yeah, going off on me. He's like, you know what? I'm out. I'm gonna go see my mom. And I'm just like, dang. I was like, you sound like a parent, like if you were in a divorced family or something. I'm just gonna live with my mom. And then I'm like, what happened? He's all like, no, literally, I got driven to the airport, bought a ticket, and I was gone. I was here for 6 months, and that was my first time coming to the United States. And then my dad was upset with me because he's all like, really, you really left? And when I called him from the house, because they already had the house in Querétaro, he's like, when I called him from the house, he's all like, yeah, I'm already here. I'll be back. I'll be back, and when I feel like it. He's like, well, your stuff's still here. He's like, yeah, you can leave my stuff there. I'll be back. And I was just like, man, what'd you do? He's like, what'd your mom do? He's like, nothing. My mom was just like, oh, you're back. Yeah, it didn't take long. Just like thinking that it would happen, and then I was like, so what happened? He's like, I was there for 2 weeks and I got bored and I went back again. And I was like, oh my god. He's like, yeah, and then he's like, but that's how easy it was for us to get across the border.
Yeah.
That we were just like, we had that luxury of going back and forth whenever we really wanted to and when we pleased to. And I'm like, and this is like in the this is in like the 80s and stuff. And I was just like, oh wow, that's crazy. And he's like, yeah. And then the amnesty came around in the late 80s, and then he got his residence. Well, a lot of our uncles and aunts got their resident cards, and then they didn't have to do that. And they were just like, all right, we'll just go whenever we want to go.
Right.
And I was just like, man, this is crazy. And so yeah, that happened. But yeah, no, that's how we ended up here in San Diego / Escondido.
Yeah.
Still doing the whole farm thing. I know our parents, Francisco's dad and my dad, they own an avocado grove, which was one of the last properties that our grandpa bought when he retired, because he retired, and then he wanted to work less air quotes.
So he bought a,
So he bought himself
what is it, 11 acres? 12
yeah, like 13
13
acre
yeah.
avocado grove. You know,
And San Pasqual, actually adjacent
literally
to
facing the other avocado
where
grove
he used to work at.
where he used to work at, and then that was his retirement project.
Yeah.
And
when was this? Like 2003?
No, so this is
when did he buy this?
we just celebrated the 25th year, so yeah, this was 2000.
Oh, 2000.
2000. So yeah, 25 years of that property being in the family, and yeah, it's because we were there. We were already living there. So my dad no longer worked for our grandpa. He worked for someone else, and they told him, hey, you know, you can take care of the grove, you can live here, but once it goes up for sale, you got to move. And that's what happened to us before, to our family. So we ended up moving. We moved there to San Pasqual, and then they said, hey, we're gonna sell it. And then my dad's like, oh, how much do you guys want for it? And long story short, grandpa was like, hey, I got some money.
So my grandpa worked at that one?
Mm-mm.
Or who worked at?
My dad.
Your dad worked at that one?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Back in the day?
Yep, back in the day.
And then he just asked, like, oh, how much?
And
my grandpa asked, like, oh, how much?
Yeah,
you guys
my dad.
want it for?
Yeah. So my dad was like, oh, they're gonna sell it. We gotta move.
Mm-hmm.
So we were already getting ready to move, and then my dad's all like, well, how much do you want for it? How much do you want for it? And he's like, you know, we want this much money. And my
back in the day, it was probably what, like 100,000?
It was 200,000, which is a lot for the early 2000s.
Yeah,
so
it's a lot.
Like literally 2000. And
but you were also buying avocado trees, which were very, very.
It was money.
Yeah,
it was gold back then.
Yeah.
So they're like, okay, cool, and then, so I remember that happened, and our grandpa was like, well, let's go in on it. Let's make this our project, you know, and so forth. So that happened. Meanwhile, our grandma and our rest of our family who didn't get here before the amnesty are still living back in Mexico, you know, and they're doing their thing. The majority of them do make it, you know, they do get their legal residence, and they're here now. But yeah, no, we still have some of the same trees that my grandpa planted. We have 3 of them because he wanted 3 of them. One for myself, my sister Vanessa, and then my little baby sister Sandra, which is closer to Francisco's age. Call her baby because she's like 10 years younger than me, but not really, you know. Yeah, and he wanted some trees for us, and we still have them there. And these things are huge. These are like maybe like 15 years old at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're big boys, and they're right by the entrance. So when you go in the driveway, the 3 little trees on the right hand side, to the
bottom driveway.
Yeah.
Yeah,
those are the ones that he's like, oh, let's plant some trees right here. We're like, who's gonna water them? He's like, I'll come out and water them because there was no water there. We're like, all right, cool. My dad's like, yeah, have fun with that. You go water your trees. Yeah, and stuff like that. You know, little things like that. So that's the background on my grandpa. That's mostly who we have information on. Our abuelita Trini, she comes from a small family as well, from that area, from El Plátano area.
As far as we know, she was already there.
She was already there, yeah. And yeah, she comes from a musical background, so she had an aunt that was part. I don't know. She was not famous, but she was a musician. So she was the one that was putting my grandma through school.
Oh, really?
Yeah, she was helping her do all that stuff, and then she, you know, ended up marrying my grandpa. So yeah,
she got distracted.
She got distracted with my grandpa. But yeah, no, that's you know, and then you know, my grandma's still around. My grandpa unfortunately passed in 2020. Yeah, he passed
October 10th, right? 10/10/20.
Yeah, 10/10/20. Yeah, October 10th. So yeah, this will be his 5th year since he passed. So yeah, no.
So my grandma Trini, as far as we know, like you said, she was already there.
She was already there.
And do we know how many siblings she had, or do we know anything about her parents?
No, not from what my uncle was telling me.
I don't think I've ever heard anything mentioned about her parents. Honestly,
Salva. Yeah, they were living there already, and they were living not too far from where the current house is at. So they were living like on the corner of a turn. That's kind of where her house was in that area. There's like a little houses that kind of live in that area. So that's kind of where I believe that's where it was, but I can't be so sure. Yeah, and as far as our abuelito Salva and our ama Paula. Our ama Paula was a huge part of my grandpa's life. They were inseparable at some point. She came to live with him, and I remember going to Mexico when I was little, and I'd see them hang out all the time. She was always there. She was always around. She had like, it's funny how my grandma now, so she had a little step stool to get
Mhm.
into the truck because that's how tiny they are.
Yeah.
So that's how short they are. Yeah. And so yeah, they have like a little step stool. So there was one step stool for my grandma Trini, and there was one for my ama Paula. And it was funny, like I'd help my ama Paula, like my grandpa would help, his wife, and I'd help my grandma out, my great grandma out, and then we would put the step stool in the back. We're like, all right, cool, we gotta get him
Put it
out.
in a truck.
We put it in the truck. Yeah,
We're
yeah,
gonna
yeah.
take
Put
it
it in the truck.
everywhere we go.
Yeah, literally, and it was funny. We just be doing that. But yeah, no, it was a beautiful experience growing up with a grandpa. Francisco did mention I was one of the more fortunate ones to get to spend a lot of time with them. But there's, on this side of the border, in Mexico, um, there's there's a lot more who got to spend time with them too. We have Eduardo. He got to spend a lot of time
Mhm.
with them because he lived with them. He
Yeah.
lived with my abuelita Trini and my abuelito Genaro. He lived with them, but as well as my tia Sara's children, because they were the ones that didn't really get to come and still haven't come,
Right.
other than Felipe. Um, but they got to live with them. Well, not live with them, but they got to experience a lot of their life with them because my
Mhm.
tia Sara was one of the main ones that literally took care of our grandpa when he was sick and when he fell and stuff like that, when he went through all that stuff. But she was taking care of him all that time, um, and still to this day, still take care of our grandma, which is, she's older.
Right.
She's at retirement age. She's past the retirement age. And when I saw her this year, I was like, man, she's always been the older family. Like I always think of her like as quote unquote grandma too, but not really because I want to respect her and
Right.
I love her and she's awesome that way. And but yeah, no, I'm like, oh man, she's got a little older. I was
Yeah.
like, man, I'm like, this is not our family. I was like, no,
Like
we
no.
can't get old. You're not allowed to. Yeah, no, it's sad, but it's beautiful at the same time
Yeah.
because there's a lot of family, there's a lot of heritage there, there's a lot of culture. Um, the way that we go back to Mexico and we honor our grandpa that way. Even going to his house, you could go to his house, whether you went to Lomas, which that's how we know it, in Querétaro, or you went to El Plátano. You always felt at home. I don't know if you want to speak
Yeah.
on that.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. I mean, you go, like, it's beautiful. Like you go, we're fortunate to have those two houses that we can go and crash out if we need to, or create those
Yeah.
memories. Like the one in Lomas, which is the one in the city, like you mentioned. That's
Hmm.
it's a pretty big house too. It's
Yeah.
probably about right now because they've added rooms to it,
Yeah.
but it's probably about 6, 7 rooms.
Yeah. Two
And
story.
yeah, but for the longest time, it was only 3 rooms. But I mean, we all have memories there.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Yeah, and then the one in the ranch in the mountain in the Sierra,
Hmm.
which is another big pretty house that they've added rooms to. But
Yeah.
yeah,
It's now like a 6 bedroom.
hmm we've always, when we were younger, we would go at least like once a year during
Yeah.
summer. Now that we've grown up and we've had more responsibilities, it's harder for all of us to get out there at the same time. But
Mm.
um, we've always kind of caught each other out there. That's
Yeah.
funny,
Definitely. Yeah.
Like,
No, it's like, oh, you're here.
yeah, like, oh, you're here, or like, hey,
Yeah.
are you going to Mexico?
You're going to Mexico?
If
When
not,
are
I'll just see you out there.
When are you going?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, another crazy thing too about El Plátano, and I think was one of the things that we all like, um, all through our siblings and our cousins, our family. There's no signal out there.
Yeah, there's no
Yeah,
signal. There's now, but like it's only Wi-Fi, I think, still,
it's
right?
Wi-Fi. Yeah.
Yeah, but there's no phone signal.
There's no phone
No
signal.
phone signal.
Yeah. No, you are literally out there, and then it's just I go
I
back
feel
to
like
mentioning how small it is, but for the longest time, if the power went out, it would rain,
Mm-hmm.
and then what our family's gonna be like tronada.
Mm-hmm. Thunder.
That was it. Thunder, lightning, no power.
Right. You're out of power.
4 days.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny enough because I experienced it quite a bit. And even one of the last times when I went to go hang out with our grandpa before he passed, I spent 2 weeks before, a couple months before he passed. Sure enough, one night it rained. Your parents were there,
Mm-hmm.
and
That was
it
thunder.
thunder, boom. All of a sudden, my phone just stops charging, and I was like, oh no, here we go. How long is this gonna go for? Because
Yeah.
first of all, yeah, you just groceries. It rains there. You're like, man, you're stuck.
Mm-hmm.
It's nasty. It's muddy. You can't get out, and you have to stock up. But if you stock up, like you have to put it in the fridge, and
Yeah.
then
And then if the light
if
goes
you
out.
don't, it goes bad. So last time I was there, one of the last times I was there was my grandpa, and then it's 3 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning. It's pitch dark. You can't see anything. My grandpa's there, and he's sick. He's going through his end of his stage, end of his life. And he's sitting there, and I hear, mijo. I go, hey, se fue la luz. Yeah, creo que sí. Ah, okay, okay. Bueno, pues ya que se despertaron, vamos a tomarnos un café. And I was just like, bro, it's 4 o'clock in the morning, bro. What are we doing?
You
And
always
then,
wanted a coffee.
yeah, we wanted the coffee. And then your mom's all like, your mom comes down because they're on the second story, and you're like, hey, creo que se fue la luz. Sí. And then, because your dad's name is Genaro, our
Yeah.
grandpa's name is Genaro, but it's spelled differently. And you hear your mom, you just be like, Genaro, espérate. And then my grandpa goes, ya estoy despierto. And then my grandma wakes up. Trini's all like, ya se despertaron. Ya se despertaron. Yo me voy a dormir otro ratito. And she's like, I'm not getting up.
It's like 4 in the morning.
Yeah, 4 in the morning.
You want to go to sleep.
I'm just sitting there. My sister's there with me too. My sister Vanessa's there with me. She's like, yeah, I was napping. I was sleeping. And I was like, I guess now you're not.
No, we're all up.
No,
Go get coffee.
We're all, and then we're sitting there in the kitchen with the candle. It's still pouring.
Mhm.
It's still super super rainy, and I'm just like, yeah, this is life here.
It's life.
This is it, man. This is
I was gonna say earlier. I was like, that's what's beautiful too. Is like when we're out there and there's no signal or there's no light or whatever. It's nice because I feel like you go back to like being a kid. You go back to childhood because you're surrounded by family, obviously all older than you.
Yeah.
And you have no, you have no technology distractions. You have no cell phone.
You just do whatever you want to do.
You were just like in the moment. It's nice.
Yeah.
So I feel like sometimes it feels like being a kid all over again. You feel like it's in that situation. You were probably the youngest one in the building. You and your sister.
Me and my sister.
Yeah,
we were.
so it's nice. You
Yeah.
kind of feel like at home. It takes
Yeah.
you back to childhood memories.
Yeah,
It's
like-
just everyone's older.
Yeah, like our grandpa. One of his jokes is all like, he's like, oh yeah. Whenever people would ask him, who didn't know where El Plátano was or whatever, he's like, oh no, it's just a little town. And he's like, oh yeah. He's like, yeah. I'm like the youngest one there, and he was like 80 years old or something at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Well, how old are you? He's like, I'm about to be like 79 in January. And you're the youngest one there. He's like, oh yeah, I'm the springiest one. I'm like, what the? Come on, man. But it's true though. It's that little town. It's endured. It survived, and it's still thriving.
Yeah.
And they're trying to make it. One of our uncles is trying to make it a little bit nicer and a touristy spot, which it is, to be honest. And people hike. People do go down there. They
ATVs, racers,
yeah,
and stuff.
yeah,
It's
the
kind of like
Can-Ams.
your outdoor activities. Yeah, your off-road trail.
Yeah, off-road trail, and people ride down their horses and stuff, and they or people the peregrinos, they go down to La Misión and stuff like that. So it's pretty neat, and the whole time, because his house is like by the road. You oversee the road, and you're just watching stuff go down, up and down. You're just like chilling, hanging out. Yeah, no, that was life. That was just a little bit about our grandpa and our grandma, Trini and stuff like that. And then on my mom's side, not a whole lot, to be honest. Unfortunately, my grandma, Pueblito, she's very loved by her peers and stuff, and what she did for the family and for the community. So she married very young, so I don't know a whole lot about her family other than that she loved her dad, but she was sold into slavery pretty much. Because this is and her and my grandpa are very similar in age, so
Mhm.
so we think that she's from like 33, 30s, maybe late 20s. So she was born. She's one of the older ones, and my grandpa and her, they they had like a really nice vibe with each other. They really respected each other. And so she was sold to this gentleman, and she had her first two two children, two two of my half uncles. Well, they're still my uncles, but
Hmm.
I guess my mom's half siblings. And so he something happened, and he ended up running away, fleeing. He ended up fleeing the state or fleeing the country. We don't know. And so she remarried again, and then she ended up having another two um, uh, sons, and another two of my mom's siblings, half siblings. And then and then she remarried again. That marriage didn't work out, and then she ended up remarrying again. So then comes my mom. She's the oldest in her in that
In
marriage,
the third
in the
marriage.
third and final marriage that my grandma had. Um, and and there's five of them, I believe. I think I'm counting them right. Yeah, five of them. So it's my mom Nora, my tia Lorena, my tío Efraín, my tío Anselmo, and then my tío Cirilo, and then my grandpa's name is Cirilo. And then so just picture this, my grandpa's a short king, little 5'4", 5'5" gentleman,
Hmm.
a little stubby, a little big built, with a beard, with the red beard. That's kind of where I get my red beard from.
Hmm.
And then this light skinned, 5'9", Mexican woman, and she wore heels.
Oh, she was pretty tall.
Oh, she was
Well,
tall.
taller than him.
She was 5'9" when she passed.
Oh wow.
That's when she passed. When she was in her late 70s when she passed, or 70 something. Yeah. So
That's like my size right now.
yeah,
My height.
no, she was, and I have pictures when I was growing up, and then like my uncle, who is 5'9" now. Okay, and this is maybe 20 years ago because she came to visit when my little sister was born to help out my mom because she's like, oh no, I gotta go help her out because I never helped her out with the other children.
Hmm.
I'm gonna go help her for her last one. So she came to stay with us for a couple years, and no, you could see like there's like an inch or two difference. Like it's visibly, and I'm just like, man, this woman was like 6 foot. And yeah, I've heard stories of my grandma like going to El Mercado because that town predominantly it's a lot of indigenous people
Hmm.
in that area because you know so we're at the tip of the Sierra Madre now in that town of Pinal de Moles, also a mining town.